Chapter 8. Dawn broke softly through the towering windows of the royal palace. Far below, the lights of Kingsport still burned against the fading darkness. Emergency beacons flashed across the city where firefighters battled lingering fires and investigators sifted through shattered concrete and twisted steel. The kingdom was awake. The kingdom was grieving. Inside the secured royal council chamber, 6 men sat around an ancient oak table that had served generations of monarchs. The mood was grim. At the head sat King Callum Rowan. To his right sat Prince Alistair. Across from them sat Crown Intelligence Director Lucian Carter, Royal Marine Commandant General Marcus Tyler, First Sea Lord Admiral Lord Cedric Hawthorne, and Duke Edward Harrington, one of Parliament's most influential members. A massive display screen dominated one wall. Images rotated silently. The destroyed transit terminal, the burning fuel district, the shattered remains of the Crown Financial Building, casualty figures, names, faces, the dead. No one spoke. Finally, the king broke the silence. The largest coordinated attack since Towerfall. Carter nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. The intelligence chief activated the console. The display changed. A black symbol appeared, a broken crown encircled by a fractured ring. The group responsible calls itself the Liberation Front. No one reacted. Everyone present already knew the name. For years, the organization had operated in the shadows, recruiting, fundraising, distributing propaganda, encouraging unrest. Now they had crossed a line. Commandant Tyler folded his arms. They've moved from agitators to insurgents. Correct, Carter replied. The next slide appeared. Intercepted communications, recovered weapons, financial transfers, known operatives. The organization claims to oppose both the Crown and the Continuum. The Duke leaned forward. There are legitimate grievances throughout the kingdom. No one disagreed. Automation, economic displacement, regional inequality, growing dependence upon AI systems, the expanding influence of the Continuum. All had become sources of public tension. The Duke continued. Many citizens are frustrated, some are fearful, some feel ignored. Prince Alistair nodded. Which makes them vulnerable. Before Carter could continue, Admiral Hawthorne spoke. The majority of our citizens remain loyal. The room shifted slightly. The Admiral's voice was calm and measured. The kingdom has faced hardship before. The Duke looked towards him. Loyalty and satisfaction are not always the same thing. No, Hawthorne inclined his head. They are not. His eyes moved toward the images of destruction. But dissatisfaction does not justify terrorism. Of course not, Harrington replied. That isn't what I'm suggesting. The Admiral folded his hands. Every generation produces people who believe society has failed them. Most endure, some improve their circumstances, a few decide violence is easier. There was no anger in his tone, no cruelty, only certainty. The Duke studied him carefully. Conditions in some districts have worsened significantly. Conditions are relative. The answer came immediately. For a moment, even Carter seemed uncomfortable. Hawthorne continued. Our citizens enjoy security, prosperity, and opportunity unmatched by most of known space. Some enjoy more of it than others, the Duke observed. A brief silence followed. The Admiral considered the statement. That has always been true. To Hawthorne, it was not an opinion. It was simply reality. The king raised a hand. Enough! The room fell silent. Carter! The intelligence director advanced the presentation. A network map appeared. Thousands of lines connected countless individuals. Most sympathizers are not members, Carter said carefully. They attend protests. They criticize government policy. Some even agree with portions of Liberation Front rhetoric. The network expanded. But the organization itself is something entirely different. Red nodes appeared. Bomb makers, arms smugglers, violent cells, off-world contacts. The king studied the display. They don't want reform. They want power. Carter nodded. Every intelligence assessment supports that conclusion. The screen changed. The shattered transit terminal appeared once again, bodies covered by emergency blankets, children among the dead. They claim to represent the people. His voice hardened slightly. They murdered civilians. Silence settled over the chamber. The king stared at the images, then spoke quietly. Continue. Carter changed the display again. Arrests, financial tracking, communication intercepts, informant networks. We've begun a comprehensive intelligence operation. The Duke reviewed the information. And public opinion? A faint expression crossed Carter's face. The attacks have changed the conversation. The screen shifted. Memorials, funerals, survivor interviews, firefighters and Royal Marines working together amid smoke and rubble. The public is seeing the consequences of Liberation Front actions. The Duke raised an eyebrow. A fortunate development. It is reality, Carter replied. We are simply ensuring it is not ignored. Admiral Hawthorne nodded once. Public sympathy for terrorists tends to decline when terrorists start murdering children. No one disagreed. Politics and conflict often occupied the same battlefield. General Tyler shifted the discussion. What about the engagement at the financial district? The display changed again. Helmet camera footage, drone recordings, satellite imagery. The room watched in silence. Richard Hale's battered fireframe emerged through smoke and flame. The civilian exo-frame engaged an insurgent combat machine. The fight was brutal, fast, violent, professional. The footage ended with the enemy exo-frame destroyed among burning wreckage. The king leaned back slowly. I've watched this 3 times, General Tyler nodded. So have most of the Royal Marines, Prince Alistair chuckled softly. Recruitment offices have already requested copies. Even Hawthorne allowed himself the faintest smile. I suspect the Navy will be disappointed to discover he was once a Marine. For the first time that morning, several people laughed. The tension eased, slightly. The king turned toward Tyler. Assessment? Professional. The Marine Commandant paused. Far beyond what any civilian firefighter should be capable of. The king's gaze narrowed. But not beyond what a former Royal Marine should be capable of. No, Your Majesty. Hawthorne studied the frozen image on the screen. The man fought an armed exo-frame with a rescue platform. The Admiral sounded genuinely impressed. I dislike waste. Recalling him to service would seem logical. The king's eyes shifted. Interesting. Prince Alistair immediately shook his head. I disagree. The room grew quiet. The king looked toward his son. Explain. Alistair stood. The display changed. Fire crews, medic teams, drone operators, civilians being rescued. Richard is already serving. He looked around the room. The Crown Emergency Service is becoming increasingly important. No one challenged the statement. Recent events had made that undeniable. People trust firefighters. The screen displayed Richard standing beside survivors. They stand outside the fear and suspicion often associated with government agencies and the military. Another image appeared, Richard helping evacuate civilians. They see Hale as one of them. The battle footage returned. If we place him back in uniform, he becomes another soldier. He paused. If he remains where he is, he becomes something more valuable. The king studied him. Go on. Alistair smiled. I've been reviewing a proposal. The display changed. A technical schematic appeared. An EF-72 fire frame, yet not entirely. Additional armor, military-grade sensors, advanced communications, integrated drone control, enhanced mobility systems, a tightly governed military AI core. Tyler leaned forward. Interesting. The concept is a hybrid platform, Alistair explained. A Crown Emergency Service frame enhanced with selected military technologies. Tyler's eyes narrowed. And who pilots it? Alistair answered immediately. Firefighter First Class Richard Hale. Silence filled the room. Even Carter appeared intrigued. A firefighter capable of disaster response, Alistair continued, and defending civilians when necessary. The screen showed combat simulations, the upgraded frame engaging insurgent exo-frames. General Tyler nodded slowly. A symbol. Exactly. The king remained thoughtful. A dangerous symbol. Perhaps. Alistair smiled slightly. But perhaps one the kingdom requires. Hawthorne studied the schematic. For several moments he said nothing. Then, he is common-born. The statement hung in the air. The Admiral wasn't insulting Richard, he was simply stating a fact. Yes, Alistair replied, which is precisely why he matters. The prince met the Admiral's gaze. Most of our citizens will never become admirals, generals, dukes, or princes. The room grew quiet. But they can become a hero. For the first time, Hawthorne seemed genuinely thoughtful. The king noticed, so did Carter. Finally, the admiral gave a small nod. "I see the political value," Alistair smiled. "I was hoping you would." The king exhaled. "Which he already is." Carter spoke carefully. "A symbol always carries risk." "Then we manage the risk." The king remained silent for several moments. Then another image appeared. Royal Marine Lieutenant Weston Howard. Tyler immediately recognized the name. A promising officer. A true Kingsman. Alistair nodded. "More than that." The display shifted again. Training records, deployment histories, old photographs. Richard Hale, Weston Howard, younger men, standing shoulder to shoulder, brothers in arms, friends. The king studied the image. "I was unaware." "There was no reason you would have been." Alistair folded his hands. "Howard still respects him." He looked around the room. "And Hale will need allies he trusts." Tyler nodded. "You want renewed contact?" "Yes." A small smile appeared. "Officially, Lieutenant Howard will coordinate with Crown Emergency Services." The Duke chuckled. "And unofficially?" Alistair's smile widened. "Unofficially, I'd like 2 old Marines speaking again." The king rose and walked toward the rain-streaked windows. Kingsport still bore the scars of violence. Buildings could be rebuilt, fires could be extinguished, but something had changed, something deeper. At last he spoke. "Proceed with the intelligence operation." "Yes, Your Majesty," Carter replied. "Continue development of the hybrid frame." Alistair inclined his head. "Thank you, Father." The king turned toward Tyler. "Arrange the meeting." "It will be done, my lord." Finally, the king looked back toward the burning city. The Liberation Front believed they had struck a decisive blow. Perhaps they had. But the Crown had already begun its response. And somewhere across Kingsport, 2 old warriors were moving toward a reunion neither yet knew was coming. Heavy 51 rolled through the streets beneath a grey sky, its armoured frame drawing curious glances from civilians. Inside the command cabin, Richard Hale sat in the pilot station while the EF-72 fireframe rested secured in its deployment cradle behind him. The calm lasted exactly 37 seconds. "Priority emergency dispatch," Atlas 51 announced over the vehicle speakers. "Multiple vehicle collision, elevated transit access ramp, possible structural failure, 6 confirmed victims, additional casualties likely." Richard sat up immediately. "Show me." A 3-dimensional holographic map appeared above the dashboard. The AI highlighted the scene. A delivery hauler had struck a support barrier and overturned. 2 civilian transports had collided, trying to avoid it. One vehicle now hung partially over the edge of the elevated roadway, nearly 60 meters above the ground. Richard whistled. "That's going to be messy." "Probability assessment agrees," Atlas 51 replied. Jace Torrin sat at the drone control station. "Messy is one word for it." Richard smirked. "Good thing we have all of the right equipment already." "Heavy 51 is 10, 23 and 3 minutes. Atlas 51 paused. "Richard, yeah?" "Based on previous incidents, you are statistically likely to ignore personal safety recommendations." Jace laughed. "There it is." Richard shook his head. "You keep records of everything, don't you?" "I am an artificial intelligence. Recording things is literally my job." The crew cabin filled with laughter. Heavy 51 arrived to chaos. Smoke drifted from damaged vehicles. A transit shuttle hung precariously over the edge of the roadway. Emergency alarms echoed across the structure. Civilians were screaming. Richard was already moving. "Deploying fireframe." The rear ramp dropped. Hydraulics hissed. The massive EF-72 stepped onto the roadway. At nearly 3 meters tall, the machine towered over nearby responders. Atlas 51 immediately fed information directly into Richard's visor. 4 heat signatures trapped inside overturned hauler. Copy. 1 patient critical inside suspended shuttle. Copy. Structural integrity of roadway section estimated at 72%. Richard frowned. "That's lower than I like." "That is because 72% is objectively lower than you like." "Thanks, Atlas." "You are welcome." Meanwhile, Jace launched the drone package. 2 fire drones shot skyward. The compact machines immediately began scanning thermal signatures and mapping structural damage. A 3rd drone descended toward the suspended shuttle. The medic drone followed. Jace's hands danced across the controls. "I've got eyes inside the shuttle." A live feed appeared. A woman was trapped between collapsed seats. Blood covered one side of her face. The shuttle groaned ominously. Richard looked at the feed. How bad? Leg fracture, possible internal injuries. The medic drone hovered beside her. Mechanical arms unfolded. The drone immediately began administering emergency treatment. Oxygen, pain management, bleeding control. The woman visibly relaxed. Medic drone reports patient stabilized. Good work, Jace grinned. Tell the drone that. I just did. Steel had twisted into a tangled mass. The cab was crushed. Atlas 51 highlighted weak points. Recommend cutting access point 3 meters forward. Richard activated the fireframe's rescue saw. The blade screamed to life. Sometimes I think you enjoy this. What is not to like about it? The saw bit into the wreckage. Sparks showered across the roadway. Within seconds, a section of reinforced hull peeled away. Richard crawled inside. 3 victims, 1 conscious, 2 unconscious. The conscious driver looked up in disbelief. The massive armoured firefighter filled the compartment. Your Crown emergency, Richard nodded. Station 51. The driver stared. You brought a mech? Richard chuckled. That's usually the reaction. Using the fireframe's strength, he carefully lifted a collapsed support beam. The trapped civilians were freed one by one. Outside, medic drones immediately moved in. Jace coordinated every movement. Patient 1 clear. Patient 2 clear. Patient 3 clear. The operation moved with machine precision. Then the roadway groaned, loudly. Everyone froze. Atlas 51 spoke instantly. Warning! A red icon flashed. Structural collapse probability increasing. Richard looked towards the suspended shuttle. It shifted, just slightly, but enough. Oh no! Jace saw it too. Richard. The friendship that had begun as professional respect now showed in his voice. There was genuine concern there. Don't! Richard smiled. You're going to say something reasonable, aren't you? Absolutely. Not interested. Jace sighed. Figures. Richard was already moving. The fireframe sprinted toward the edge. Atlas 51 immediately began calculations. Richard. What? This is a terrible idea. That is an incredibly helpful observation. Current plan has a 31% chance of severe injury. Richard reached the shuttle. See, that's 69% success. That is not how statistics work. Close enough, Jace groaned. I cannot believe I work with you. The fireframe locked its magnetic anchors into the roadway. Richard grabbed the suspended shuttle. Thousands of kilograms pulled against him. Hydraulic systems strained. Warning lights filled his visor. Atlas 51 monitored every component. Frame stress reaching limits. Understood. Recommend stopping. No. Recommendation updated. Please stop. Richard laughed despite the effort. Slowly the shuttle rose. Emergency crews attached support cables. The medic drone remained beside the trapped woman the entire time. Finally, the shuttle settled onto solid pavement. Cheers erupted across the roadway. Civilians applauded. Richard released the vehicle. The fireframe took one exhausted step backward, then another. Jace's voice came over the comms. You know what? What? That was actually pretty impressive, Richard grinned. I thought so. It was still stupid. Probably. Definitely. For a moment neither spoke. Then Jace smiled. Glad it worked. The words were simple, but Richard understood what they meant. Glad the rescue worked. Glad nobody died. Glad Richard hadn't become one of the casualties. Richard looked out across the scene. Victims rescued. Fire contained. Traffic secured. Another ordinary day at Station 51. Thanks, Jace. The drone operator nodded. Anytime. Atlas 51 interrupted. Incident successfully resolved. Richard sighed. Good. The AI paused. However, I have logged another example of you ignoring professional advice. Richard laughed. Of course you did. I currently possess 412 examples. Jace nearly fell out of his chair laughing. Heavy 51 began the trip back to Station 51 while emergency lights reflected across the city skyline. For the first time in a long while, Richard found himself looking forward to the ride home. Orders from the Crown Royal Marine Weston Howard stood at attention in the outer office of Marine Command Headquarters. The polished black floor reflected the bright overhead lights. Through the reinforced windows behind him, dozens of training exo-frames moved across the massive proving grounds. Weeks ago, that sight would have filled him with excitement. Now it mostly reminded him of responsibility. The Marine Corps receptionist looked up from her terminal. Captain General Davis will see you now. Weston nodded. Thank you. The heavy doors slid open. The office beyond was surprisingly simple. No lavish decorations, no unnecessary displays of rank. Just a large desk, several tactical displays, and a wall-sized holographic map of the realm. Captain General Marcus Davis stood beside the map with his hands behind his back. "Lieutenant Howard." "Sir." "At ease." Weston relaxed slightly. Davis studied him for several moments. "You've recovered well?" "Yes, sir." That was technically true. His injuries from Kingsport had healed, the memories had not. The general walked around the desk. "The King and Crown Prince have reviewed the reports from the Kingsport attacks." Weston remained silent. He already knew where this conversation was headed. The reports had become required reading throughout Marine Command. Not because of the terrorists, because of what happened afterward, because a Royal Marine had ended up fighting alongside firefighters, because civilians had survived, and because an entire section of downtown Kingsport was still standing. Davis handed him a data tablet. Weston accepted it. At the top of the screen was a familiar face. Richard Hale, Station 51, Crown Emergency Services. Weston couldn't help smiling. Davis noticed. "You seem pleased." "Firefighter Hale is a good man, sir." "So I've heard." Weston looked back at the image. The memory returned immediately. The financial district had been chaos, smoke, sirens, collapsed transit tunnels, burning vehicles. The sounds still echoed in his memory. He had not even been on duty. The attacks had begun shortly after he left the Royal Marine exo-frame training grounds. His combat rig was still secured at the base when he entered Kingsport. Like thousands of others, he had found himself trapped inside a city under attack. Only unlike most people, his instincts had carried him toward the danger. Royal Marion is never unarmed. He remembered turning a corner and seeing the financial tower. A wall of black smoke climbed hundreds of meters into the air. Emergency vehicles crowded the streets. Station 3 was already engaged. Firefighters were trying to evacuate civilians while secondary explosions tore through nearby buildings. Then another explosion rocked the entire block. Weston remembered the moment clearly. The collapsing debris, the falling concrete, the civilians trapped beneath it, and Battalion Chief Eleanor Ward standing directly in the danger zone. Without thinking, he moved. Marine training, pure instinct. He sprinted forward as sections of the damaged structure began to fail. People were screaming. Concrete shattered against the street. Weston grabbed 2 civilians and threw them clear moments before debris crashed into the roadway. Dust swallowed the intersection. For several seconds, visibility vanished completely. Then figures emerged from the smoke. Firefighters. The battle seemed endless. Terrorist attacks, building collapses, fires spreading across multiple blocks. Nobody knew how much worse it would become. Then reports began spreading through the emergency channels. A Crown Emergency Services exo-frame had arrived. Heavy Rescue 51, Richard Hale. Weston remembered hearing the name from one of the firefighters coordinating the evacuation. At first he thought he had misheard. He had not seen Richard in years. The two men had known each other long before either had built their respective careers. Richard had joined Crown Emergency Services while Weston had committed himself to the Royal Marines. Life had simply taken them in different directions. Then came more reports. A terrorist industrial mech had appeared near the financial tower. Emergency crews were pinned down. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Richard Hale had engaged it. The details sounded impossible. The fireframe was never intended for combat. Yet Richard had charged directly into the fight. Witnesses later described a brutal hand-to-hand battle among the burning ruins of the financial district. Steel crashed against steel. Buildings shook from the impacts. The terrorist machine outweighed the fireframe and carried heavier armor. None of it mattered. Richard refused to back down. The final moments of the fight became the stuff of legends. Using a steel support beam ripped from the wreckage around him, Richard drove the massive length of metal through the industrial mech. The beam punched through armor, through the cockpit, and through the terrorist pilot inside. The enemy machine collapsed moments later. The battle for the financial district was finally over. By the time Weston reached the scene, emergency crews were securing the area and tending to the wounded. The destroyed industrial mech lay crumpled among the rubble. Nearby stood an EF-72 fireframe covered in soot, scorch marks, and damage. Richard climbed down from the machine looking exhausted. For a moment the two men simply stared at each other. Years had passed since they had last met. Richard was the first to smile. "Howard!" Weston shook his head. "Hale!" Richard glanced towards the ruined mech. "Looks like I picked an interesting day to come to work." Weston laughed despite everything they had just survived. Some things never change. The memory remained one of the proudest moments of Weston's career. "Howard!" General Davis's voice pulled him back to the present. "Sir, you were somewhere else." Weston nodded slightly. Remembering Kingsport, Davis folded his arms. "Understandable." For several moments, neither man spoke. Finally, the general activated a nearby display. Images appeared. Station 51, Richard Hale, Captain Aaron Rourke, Jace Torrin, Heavy Rescue 51, drone operations, fire response statistics, emergency deployment records. Weston immediately understood. "You want me assigned to them?" Davis smiled. "The Crown Prince wants you assigned to them." Weston raised an eyebrow. "That's usually a stronger order." "It is." The general walked toward the display. "The realm is changing." Images shifted. Royal Marines, emergency services, joint operations, disaster responses, terrorist incidents, natural disasters, industrial accidents. The future will require cooperation between organizations. Weston nodded. He already believed that. Kingsport had proven it. The general continued. "The Crown believes your relationship with Richard Hale provides a unique opportunity." Weston looked at the screen again. Richard's picture remained displayed. The firefighter who somehow kept finding trouble. The firefighter who would charge an industrial mech with a rescue rig if civilians were in danger. The firefighter who had remained the same stubborn, dependable friend Weston remembered from years earlier. Weston found himself smiling again. Davis noticed. "Definitely friends?" "Yes, sir." "Good."